Think about the last time you were completely absorbed in a difficult task. Maybe you were trying to solve a complex mathematical equation, or perhaps you were straining to recall a name that was right on the tip of your tongue. In those moments of deep intensity, your face does something almost universal. You knit your brows. The skin between your eyebrows furrows, your eyes might slightly squint, and your entire focus narrows to a sharp point. To most of us, this is just a sign of mental struggle, a physical byproduct of pushing our brains to the limit. We see it as tension, or even a sign of frustration. But according to the great yogi Paramahansa Yogananda, this instinctive gesture is far more significant than a mere facial expression. He suggested that when we concentrate deeply, we are actually responding to a subconscious pull toward a very specific, vital center in the human body. Yogananda explained that the frontal lobe of the brain is the primary seat of human intuition and higher will. When you knit your brows, you aren't just reacting to stress, you are experiencing a physiological response where the life force, or prana, naturally gravitates toward the forehead. This spot, located precisely between the eyebrows, is what ancient Vedic traditions refer to as the kutastha, or the spiritual eye. It is the doorway where our consciousness transitions from the external world of the five senses to the internal realm of spiritual perception. Yogananda often pointed out that even a person who knows nothing of meditation will instinctively direct their energy toward this center when they need to think most clearly. Today, we're beginning our journey by exploring how this simple, everyday physical habit acts as a bridge, revealing a profound spiritual truth about the hidden location of our true intelligence and willpower. To really grasp Yogananda's teachings on this specific spot, we have to travel back to 1920. When Paramahansa Yogananda stepped off the ship in Boston for the International Congress of Religious Liberals, he brought a specific mission: to bridge the gap between Western science and Eastern spirituality. He didn't see these as opposing forces. Instead, he presented meditation as a literal science of the soul, a systematic method that could be verified through direct experience. This wasn't just abstract philosophy. Yogananda's approach was deeply rooted in the biology of the human brain. He focused heavily on how our physical anatomy serves as a conduit for divine consciousness. He often pointed to a very specific, everyday human behavior that we all instinctively perform. Think about it. When you're straining to remember a forgotten name, or when you're deep in concentration trying to solve a complex problem, what do your eyes do? They naturally drift upward. Your eyebrows knit together right at that central spot just above the bridge of the nose. Yogananda argued that this isn't a random coincidence. It's a biological and spiritual instinct. In those moments, we are subconsciously seeking the help of the higher faculties located at the point between the eyebrows, what he called the spiritual eye, or the kutastha. In physiological terms, this area correlates with the prefrontal cortex, the seat of executive function and willpower. By knitting the brows, we are physically focusing energy at the frontal lobe. Yogananda taught that this spot is the broadcast station for our intentions and the receiving station for intuition. He wanted to show that the West's drive for scientific proof and the East's ancient meditation were actually two sides of the same coin, meeting right at this neurological gateway. Think about the last time you were truly stumped by a difficult problem or a deep mystery. Naturally, you probably squinted your eyes and knitted your brows, right at that central point above the bridge of your nose. Paramahansa Yogananda taught that this isn't just a physiological habit, it's a physical manifestation of a profound spiritual reality. He identified this specific spot as the kutastha, or the third eye. In his most evocative descriptions, he called it the throne of the soul. But let's look closer at why this location is so critical. Yogananda described this area, positioned behind the forehead between the eyebrows, as the broadcasting station of the human body. While the medulla oblongata at the base of the skull acts as the receiving station for cosmic life force, the kutastha is where we project our will into the world. It is the command center for our entire being. In the science of Kriya Yoga, this point is the seat of the Ajna chakra. When we concentrate here, we are effectively gathering the scattered rays of our attention. Most people operate with what Yogananda called a scattered mind, where mental energy leaks out through the five senses and constant restless thoughts. By drawing that energy upward and inward to this single point, we transform a dim, flickering light into a high-intensity laser. This level of focus isn't just for spiritual seekers. Yogananda was firm in his teaching that this inner focus is the engine for both material success and spiritual realization. When your individual will is centered at the kutastha, it begins to synchronize with the cosmic energy of the universe. You are no longer just an isolated ego struggling against the world. You are tapping into a vast, intelligent field. By directing your life force toward this inner eye, you bridge the gap between human striving and divine achievement. When you're deep in thought, perhaps trying to solve a complex puzzle or recall a distant memory, your eyebrows naturally gravitate toward each other. We call it knitting the brows. Paramahansa Yogananda pointed to this involuntary physical reaction as a vital clue to our spiritual anatomy. He taught that this specific point, the kutastha or spiritual eye, isn't just a metaphorical concept. It corresponds directly with the prefrontal cortex, the most highly evolved region of the human brain. In both biology and yoga, this area is the command center. The prefrontal cortex handles executive function, complex decision-making, and willpower. Yogananda took this a step further, positing that by consciously directing our internal gaze and concentration to this spot, we aren't just thinking, we are literally stimulating the highest centers of our being. It is the bridge between the physical and the metaphysical. He argued that most of our reactive, instinctual behaviors stem from the lower brain centers, often associated with the medulla oblongata and the primitive brain. However, by tuning into the spiritual eye, we bypass those animalistic impulses and tap into what he called divine intelligence. This shift is what allows for the inner guide to take the wheel. It's a form of spiritual neuroplasticity. When we focus here, we strengthen the connection to our higher self, transforming raw willpower into enlightened action. Ultimately, Yogananda's legacy shows that our anatomy is a map to our divinity. That simple act of knitting the brows during concentration is actually a physical echo of the soul trying to find its way home. By mastering this point of focus, we don't just become better thinkers, we become more realized versions of ourselves, bridging the gap between the mundane and the infinite. Think about the last time you were really focusing on a difficult problem. Maybe you were squinting at a screen or trying to recall a distant memory. Chances are your eyebrows were scrunched together, creating those deep vertical lines just above the bridge of your nose. We often call this knitting the brows. In our modern world, we see it as a badge of hard work, a physical sign of mental effort. But Paramahansa Yogananda offered a completely different perspective. He taught that this physical tension is actually a byproduct of the ego attempting to force concentration through sheer muscular willpower, rather than relaxed awareness. According to Yogananda, when we knit our brows, we are essentially trying to grab a thought with our physical body. He explained that this tension serves as a significant blockage. The point between the eyebrows, often referred to as the spiritual eye or the seat of the kutastha, is a sensitive energetic portal. When you tense the muscles around it, you're creating resistance, much like a kink in a garden hose. The energy is there, it's present and wanting to flow to that focal point, but it's being throttled by the physical strain of the forehead. Yogananda encouraged his students to practice a specific shift, relax the forehead entirely while keeping the attention fixed at that spot. The goal isn't to squeeze the brain, but to gently lift the internal gaze without pulling the skin. Imagine the difference between trying to force a door open versus simply unlocking it and letting it swing wide. By relaxing the physical brow, you remove the ego's interference. This allows the life force, or prana, to ascend naturally to the higher centers of perception. True concentration isn't a muscular feat. It's a state of deep, calm absorption where the spiritual eye opens naturally. Think about the last time you were really focusing on a difficult problem or trying to remember a distant memory. You probably didn't realize it, but you likely knitted your brows, bringing them together right at that central point just above the bridge of your nose. Paramahansa Yogananda explained that this isn't just a random physical tic. It is an intuitive, unconscious response to the flow of energy within the subtle body. In Yogananda's Anatomy of the Spirit, this spot between the eyebrows is the spiritual eye, the seat of concentration and the center of willpower. But its function is intrinsically linked to another critical point, the medulla oblongata at the base of the skull. Yogananda referred to the medulla as the mouth of God. He taught that this area is the primary portal through which cosmic energy, or prana, enters the physical body from the surrounding universe. Imagine the medulla as a spiritual receiving station. Once that life force enters at the back of the head, it flows forward, straight through the brain, toward the spiritual eye at the front. When you concentrate intensely at the spot between your brows, you are essentially completing a circuit. You are aligning your individual will with the universal supply of energy entering through the medulla. It is a literal bridge between the finite and the infinite. By focusing at that knitted spot, you pull the energy from the medulla toward the frontal lobes, heightening your awareness. When these two poles, the receiving medulla and the transmitting spiritual eye, are connected through deep concentration, you tap into a reservoir of life force that far exceeds your own limited physical capacity, turning focus into a divine connection. When you watch someone lost in deep thought, you'll often see their eyebrows draw together, creating a small furrow right between the eyes. Paramahansa Yogananda explained that this isn't just a sign of mental effort. It's actually the mind's instinctive, often unconscious attempt to look inward at the spiritual eye. He called this the Star of the East, and he provided a remarkably precise description of what a meditator actually sees when they pierce the veil of physical darkness. Imagine in the stillness of deep meditation, a vivid, three-dimensional vision appearing in that space between the brows. Yogananda described a brilliant golden ring of light. This ring surrounds a sphere of deep, luminous opal blue. And right at the very center of that blue field, there is a tiny, glowing, five-pointed white star. To the uninitiated, this might sound like a poetic metaphor or perhaps a hallucination, but Yogananda was adamant. This is a literal perception of the underlying architecture of human existence. The golden ring represents the astral energy, the life force that animates the physical body. The deep blue sphere is the gateway to the Christ consciousness, the universal intelligence. And that white star? That's the door to the infinite, the causal realm. Knitting the brows in concentration draws our internal energy towards this point, the kutastha. We are trying to push through the darkness of the closed physical eyes to find the inner light that actually sustains our consciousness. It's a biological echo of a spiritual search. By focusing here, the meditator begins to see the subtle energies that make up our form, moving from the physical world into the radiant astral and causal lights. This is the science of inner perception. Think about a scientist peering through a microscope, or a student hunched over a difficult physics exam. What do they have in common? It is that characteristic knit of the brow. That unconscious tension at the point between the eyebrows is a universal sign of the mind narrowing its focus. Paramahansa Yogananda pointed to this physical reaction as evidence that the seat of human concentration is naturally located at this specific spot. In the secular world, we use this faculty primarily to shut out the world. We ignore the noise of the street, the ticking of the clock, and any peripheral movement to zoom in on a single material task. This is secular concentration. It is a powerful tool for worldly success, but Yogananda taught that it is actually an outward application of a divine faculty. He urged us to distinguish this from true spiritual meditation. While a researcher uses focus to analyze a biological cell, a yogi uses that exact same intensity to perceive the presence of the infinite within. The internal mechanism of one-pointedness is identical, but the direction is reversed. Yogananda often noted that the same passion people bring to their professional lives, that do-or-die attitude of a surgeon or an artist at a canvas, is precisely the level of intensity required for the spiritual path. The difference lies in the spot and the spirit. When we concentrate at the point between the eyebrows, known as the spiritual eye or kutastha, we are tapping into the command center of our consciousness. However, Yogananda emphasized that for concentration to become meditation, it must be saturated with devotion. Without love, concentration is merely a mental exercise. With it, that focused power becomes a bridge to the divine. Think about when you're really focusing on a difficult problem. You naturally knit your brows together, right? Paramahansa Yogananda pointed out that this isn't just a physical habit, It's an intuitive pull toward the seat of concentration. This spot, located just between the eyebrows, is the doorway to the spiritual eye, also known as the Ajna chakra. In Yogananda's teachings, this specific point is the gateway to what he called Christ consciousness, or Kutastha Chaitanya. It's a powerful idea because it bridges the gap between Eastern and Western spirituality. He explained that this consciousness isn't exclusive to a single historical figure. Rather, it's the same universal, omnipresent intelligence that was fully manifested in masters like Jesus, Krishna, and Mahavatar Babaji. When a seeker focuses their gaze and energy at this point, they aren't just thinking deeply, they are attempting to tune their internal perception to a much higher frequency. The journey begins with simple concentration, but as the meditator's focus deepens, the internal landscape changes. Yogananda describes a process where awareness begins to expand outward. The knit brow is just the physical precursor to a metaphysical expansion. You start to move away from the limited I, that small, ego-driven identity tied to your physical body, and begin to touch the cosmic self. Imagine the shift. Instead of feeling confined to your own skin, you begin to perceive your own essence within every atom of creation. This isn't just poetic imagery. For Yogananda, it was a practical science. By penetrating the light of the spiritual eye, the individual soul realizes its unity with the infinite, transforming the simple act of concentration into a state of divine, all-pervading awareness. When we find our thoughts scattering like leaves in a gale, Yogananda points us towards a very specific anchor, the space between the eyebrows. But how exactly do we utilize this spot without causing a headache? It's certainly not about squinting or forcing your eyes to cross in a painful way. Instead, Yogananda taught a refined, subtle technique of gentle focus. He suggested gazing upward, but with a crucial distinction: you aren't straining your physical eye muscles. Think of it as looking through your forehead, as if you were peering out at a vast, infinite horizon miles away. This isn't an aggressive stare. Your eyes should be either completely closed or held comfortably at half-mast, in a state that is simultaneously relaxed and incredibly steady. This stillness serves a profound purpose. In Yogananda's teachings, there is a direct physiological link between the involuntary movement of your eyeballs and the fluctuations of your chitta, or the underlying mind stuff. When your eyes dart around, even behind closed lids, your thoughts follow suit, fueled by restless, nervous energy. By calming the physical eyes and directing them to the single point of concentration, you effectively put the brakes on that mental restlessness. It is a biological feedback loop for the soul. When you anchor your internal vision to that center, the swirling whirlpool of the chitta begins to settle into a glassy lake. You move from the chaotic peripheral noise of daily life into a centered, quiet clarity. The knit brow of intense intellectual labor transforms into the smooth, uplifted gaze of deep spiritual perception. It's a transition from struggle to awareness, using the body's own anatomy to bridge the gap between a wandering mind and a concentrated spirit. By holding this position without tension, you invite the mind to rest in its natural state of profound peace. Have you ever noticed what happens when someone is intensely focused? Their forehead tightens, and they often knit their brows right at the spot between the eyes. Paramahansa Yogananda explained that this isn't just a random physical habit, it is a physiological clue to a profound spiritual mechanism. He addressed the universal struggle of mental distraction by revealing that the spiritual eye, that point in the forehead, actually acts as a powerful magnet for our attention and life force. When we truly center our consciousness at this spot, something remarkable happens to our internal biology. The energy that usually flows outward through our five senses begins to reverse its course. This state of sensory withdrawal is known in Sanskrit as pratyahara. Yogananda used a brilliant analogy to describe this. He compared our senses to telephone wires. Normally, these wires are buzzing with data, sounds, sights, and sensations, constantly ringing in the office of the mind. But when the magnet of the spiritual eye is activated, you essentially unplug those wires. This explains why a person deep in thought might not hear their name being called or notice a sudden breeze in the room. They haven't lost their hearing. Rather, they have successfully withdrawn their energy from the sensory instruments and redirected it toward the inner broadcasting station of the third eye. By focusing intently on this single point, the static of the external world simply fades out. Yogananda taught that this isn't just for geniuses or meditators, but a natural law of consciousness. By mastering this magnetic pole, we stop being victims of every passing distraction and learn to anchor our soul in a state of profound, unshakable clarity. Paramahansa Yogananda was truly unique among spiritual teachers because he invited skeptics to treat his techniques not as religious dogma, but as a series of rigorous biological experiments. He often pointed to the knit brow, that instinctive, almost subconscious furrowing between the eyes when we are deep in thought or trying to solve a complex puzzle. To Yogananda, this wasn't merely a facial expression. It was a physical manifestation of energy redirecting itself toward the frontal lobe and the spiritual eye. He challenged his students to actually test and observe the physiological shift that occurs during intense concentration at this specific point. When you truly anchor your attention there, a remarkable feedback loop begins. The breath starts to rhythmically slow down, and the heartbeat follows suit. In yoga philosophy, there is a direct, almost mathematical relationship between the rate of our breathing and the turbulence of our thoughts. By consciously focusing on that spot between the eyebrows, we are essentially tapping into the medulla oblongata, what Yogananda called the seat of life force, to induce a state of profound physiological rest. Think of this as turning down the volume on metabolic noise. Our bodies are constantly generating a roar of feedback from digestion, circulation, and external sensory input. This noise clutters the consciousness, making it impossible to hear the subtle whispers of intuition. Yogananda explained, by achieving this stillness of the breath and heart, we effectively hit the mute button on the body's survival demands. It creates a state of biological equilibrium. Only when the physiological engine is idling can the higher mind function without interference. This isn't just passive relaxation. It is the high-precision tuning of the human instrument, turning the knit brow into a bridge towards scientific inner clarity. When you see someone deep in thought, perhaps trying to solve a complex mathematical equation or recall a distant flickering memory, you'll notice they naturally knit their brows. Paramahansa Yogananda pointed to this involuntary physical reaction as a significant clue to our internal biological and spiritual design. He connected this specific spot, the point between the eyebrows, to ancient Indian traditions like the use of the tilak or bindi. While many today see these marks as purely decorative or cultural, Yogananda explained their profound esoteric purpose. They serve as a constant physical reminder of the true eye, or the spiritual eye. He taught that our two physical eyes are biologically built to navigate the world of duality, or what Sanskrit calls dvandvas. These eyes perceive only opposites, light and shadow, heat and cold, good and evil. They keep us tethered to a fragmented, polarized reality. However, the single spiritual eye at the brow is the seat of pure intuition. Yogananda argued that when our focus is concentrated here, the human consciousness transcends these contradictions to perceive the underlying unity of all existence. What made Yogananda's approach so revolutionary when he arrived in the West was how he bridged this Eastern mysticism with Western science. He didn't just speak of chakras, he spoke of neurology and the endocrine system. He identified this frontal focal point as being energetically linked to the medulla oblongata at the base of the skull, forming a powerful pole of energy. He explained that by concentrating at the brow, we are actually stimulating the prefrontal cortex and directing the flow of life force, or prana, toward the seat of higher realization. By explaining the third eye through the lens of psychology and the nervous system, he transformed the ancient practice of the tilak into a practical tool for mental discipline and cosmic perception. Have you ever noticed what happens to your face when you're wrestling with a difficult problem or trying to recall a distant memory? Your forehead tightens and your eyebrows naturally draw together, forming those characteristic vertical lines. Paramahansa Yogananda suggested that this isn't just a random facial expression. It's a physical sign of the soul trying to focus its energy at the spiritual eye. He called this center the seat of intuition, or what he frequently termed the sixth sense. Yogananda made a fascinating distinction between the intellect and intuition. The intellect, he argued, is essentially a processor of sensory data. It takes what we see, hear, and touch, and then tries to jump to a logical conclusion. It's a step-by-step, often fragmented process, limited by the physical senses. Intuition, however, is what he described as direct perception. It doesn't need to climb the ladder of logic or rely on external evidence. It simply knows the truth immediately because it is tuned into the universal reservoir of knowledge. This is where it gets really interesting for the creators and thinkers among us. Yogananda claimed that every great scientific discovery, every masterpiece of art, and every revolutionary invention didn't come from the intellect alone. Instead, he believed the individual was unknowingly tapping into the cosmic intelligence accessible through the spiritual eye. When a scientist knits their brows in deep thought, they are subconsciously drawing energy toward the prefrontal cortex, the biological seat of this spiritual faculty. By consciously directing our attention to this point between the eyebrows, Yogananda taught that we could move beyond mere guesswork. We transition from thinking about a subject to becoming one with the knowledge itself. It's the difference between looking at a map and actually standing in the center of the city. How do we actually bring these profound spiritual concepts into the messy, fast-paced reality of daily life? Paramahansa Yogananda was incredibly practical about this. He didn't want his students to be spiritual only while sitting in silence for a few minutes a day. Instead, he advocated for a state of background awareness. Think of it like a program running quietly in the background of a computer while you're actively working in the foreground. Yogananda taught that even while you are engaged in intense conversation or performing complex work duties, you should keep a portion of your attention, roughly 25%, anchored at the spot between the eyebrows. This is the seat of the spiritual eye, the center of will and intuition. When we maintain this focus, something fascinating happens to our internal state. We've all seen someone knit their brows when they are trying to solve a difficult problem. This physical act is an unconscious attempt to direct energy toward the prefrontal cortex. However, Yogananda pointed out a crucial distinction between the knit brow of deep, calm concentration and the knit brow of egoic anxiety. The former is a magnetic pull toward clarity. The latter is a tense, muscular reaction to stress. By consciously keeping your internal gaze upward, you create a psychological buffer. Instead of being swept away by external demands, you remain centered. You are training your nervous system to stay connected to its highest potential while performing mundane tasks. This dynamic stillness allows you to be truly effective in the world without being drained by it. When your energy is anchored at the spiritual eye, your heart rate remains steady and your intuition stays sharp. It ensures that the peace you cultivate in meditation doesn't evaporate the moment you open your inbox.
Paramahansa Yogananda's enduring legacy is perhaps most poignantly captured in his teachings on the spiritual eye, that singular point between the eyebrows where our physical and metaphysical worlds collide. He taught that the ultimate trajectory of human evolution isn't found in external technology or social structures, but in the full, conscious awakening of this inner vision. Think about the last time you were truly lost in a difficult task, trying to solve a complex puzzle or recall a faded memory. Without even realizing it, you likely knitted your brows, instinctively drawing your focus toward that exact spot. Yogananda pointed out that this isn't just a biological facial habit, it is a profound subconscious recognition of where our true mental and spiritual power lies. In the specialized science of yoga, this location is known as the Ajna chakra, or the command center. Yogananda explained a fascinating energetic circuit. While life force, or prana, enters the body through the medulla oblongata at the base of the skull, it is reflected and projected through the spiritual eye. When we concentrate deeply, we are essentially attempting to narrow our scattered, flickering thoughts into a single piercing beam of light at this star of the East. He described the spiritual eye as having a specific, beautiful geometry, a golden halo surrounding a sphere of deep blue, with a brilliant five-pointed silvery white star at the center. To Yogananda, every act of intense concentration is a micro-step toward divine realization. It's a reminder that we are inherently divine. Even in our most mundane tasks, our physiology is wired to reach for a higher state of consciousness. His message remains, look within, for the window to the entire universe is located right between your eyes. By penetrating that light, we bridge the gap between our limited self and the infinite.